Thank you very much, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to continue our entrepreneurship theme that we began with our last panel. This panel is accelerating discovery to patient care. I'd like to remind you, please, to hold questions until the end. So I'd like to introduce our panelists in the order that they're seated to you. Dr. Ross Tonkins is a director of American Heart Association's Science and Technology Accelerator Program. Next to Ross is Jill Seidman. She's the director of HealthBox. Jill leads HealthBox's research and thought leadership initiatives across all programs. Welcome, Jill. Next to Jill is Gary Keller. Gary is CEO of Zomix, a Chicago-based technology accelerator and international consultancy on tech strategy, intellectual asset management, commercialization, and global business development services. Dr. Michael Liang is a partner with Baird Capital. He concentrates on healthcare investments. Prior to joining Baird, Mike was a venture partner with Advent Venture Partners. And then we have Larry Brooks down on the end there. Welcome, Larry. Larry's the director of new business model and healthcare innovation at Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals, and as you all know, they are the world's largest privately owned pharmaceutical company. Ross, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us how the American Heart Association Science and Technology Accelerator determines what it should invest in? And also, can you share with us how you use the strength of the AHA brand to attract investors, please?
Sure, thanks, Charlie. First, I need to give you sort of a 40,000-foot view to provide the context. Over the years, about 80 years plus, AHA has provided over $3.5 billion for the advancement of basic science, and the result has included 13 Nobel Prizes and innovations from actually CPR to defibrillators, pacemakers, statins, and so forth. AHA developed 2020 impact goals that include decreasing death from heart attack and stroke by 20% by the year 2020. The recognition came that all of the innovations to date that came along with the Nobel Prizes were successful, but how many may never even have seen the light of day? And more important, how long is it going to take, particularly with the current widening of the so-called valley of death, for some of these to get from bench to bedside where they can make an impact? As a result, they decided to create the accelerator program for identifying the game changers, the disruptive transformational technologies, and getting them across the valley of death where they can be handed off to others to take them all the way to the finish line and to impact huge numbers of outcomes to help decrease death from heart attack and stroke by 20% by 2020. So in that context, how do we determine what to invest in? We look all over, first of all, everything from individuals approaching me, even at conferences, panel discussions, AHA's annual sessions, to present their innovations, tech transfer offices, my network of friends in venture capital who will say, we really think this is worth looking at, it's just a bit early for us to get involved in. And determining whether they can impact the number of outcomes necessary to advance those 2020 goals. So that said, just to give you an example, the first panel was addressing the need to identify risk in order to improve the percentage of positive outcomes. An example of one of our investments was a vascular health profile that assesses the integrity of the vascular endothelium. The implication of that is the ability to identify the marathon runner who's going to drop dead in his next race and also to assess the efficacy of preventive therapy. Just because you lower cholesterol doesn't mean you've actually lowered the risk where the rubber meets the road, namely the vascular endothelium. So I think that's an example of the kind of innovation we look for capable of impacting huge numbers of outcomes. In terms of the value of the brand, we are somewhat unique in that this accelerator program is not funded directly by the AHA from the general budget, but must raise from donors the capital necessary to make the investments. One thing we do have, although it's not a huge amount of capital, is the power of the brand. And so I use the brand once we have selected and de-risked innovations that we think should be propelled to market, and loop in co-investors who might not have been willing to put money in that early in development, but who will listen if AHA says, we have looked at this, not just from medical and scientific angle, but intellectual property, commercialization, regulatory pathway, and so forth. And we believe this will make a huge impact. And as a result, we're able to loop in 5, 6, the most recent investment, we got $7 from co-investors to each one of ours. And that's how we select and how we use what we have from donors to get things across the valley of death.
Thank you, Ross. Jill, how is HealthBox working to connect innovators with the healthcare establishment?
Great. So first, I think the most important question is why we're looking to connect innovators with industry. So you heard it time and time again on the last panel how important it is for innovators to meet with all aspects and all stakeholders within the healthcare system. That you can't just design a product for one hospital, but you need the payer involvement and the pharmaceutical involvement. Well, that's not actually that easy for entrepreneurs overall. Anecdotally, this week in Florida, I was told by one of our entrepreneurs that for his last company, it took him 5 years to get a meeting with Florida Blue, the largest payer in Florida. By participating in our accelerator program, he was able to meet with senior level executives, about 30 of them over the 4-month program, and that referred him to about 80 other meetings across the state that have helped him to grow his business faster than he ever expected. The how is actually related to a little bit more of how it's really important to co-create solutions with the industry. Entrepreneurs, as I mentioned before, really need that added exposure to all stakeholders and for them to all sit in one room. I think for a lot of our companies, it's focusing on that you need the nurse buy-in, the physician buy-in, the payer buy-in, and the CEO administrator buy-in in order to make their company sustainable and to be able to grow. So a great example for us is actually one of our companies is called Gecko Cap. And it's a really simple solution where it's a cap that goes on an asthma inhaler and it glows when the child needs to take his or her medication or use his or her inhaler. It's really simple, but what you quickly realize is that who's going to buy it? Everyone loves it. The providers love the way that it's connected to a software that will give them data if the child's taking his or her inhaler on time. The parents love it because it text messages them if the child does not take his inhaler. So therefore, they're able to be notified and can tell their child or call the school nurse to make something change. But no one wants to pay for it. The consumer didn't want to pay $200. The pharmaceutical company thinks it's great, but they are selling enough. They don't need it. And the providers really want to use it, but they don't have the revenue for it too. And unfortunately, they're making money off of those ED admissions that are coming in unnecessarily. So what we've realized actually is that for a company like that, by being able to put all those stakeholders in the room, our entrepreneur in Boston was able to grow his company way more successfully than he had been for the 1.5 years before then he was working on it on his own.
Thanks, Jill. Gary, can you discuss the fast-changing landscape of what's happening in healthcare right now, please?
From a perspective of innovation, there's a trend now to looking at how we're going to deal with patient care, not just healthcare. Healthcare is a market. And so from a business perspective, you're looking at where are the profitable revenue streams, but those don't always necessarily have a positive impact on patient outcomes, as Jill was pointing to with the inhaler. Having now in place, for example, in this country, reimbursement based on patient outcomes is shifting itself all the way back to product development and how companies are looking at where their innovations are going to grow for the future, how they're going to get reimbursed. Because again, if no one's going to pay for that innovation, then it's never going to make its way to market. And if the reimbursement and the guidelines are going to change based on patient outcomes, it's going to change how we look at what it is we are going to innovate with a stronger sense of what's going to benefit patient care. And I think that's an important thing everywhere, because I know that you say everyone has to come together and has to have buy-in, and people that are in the healthcare industry, whether it's from the perspective of a doctor or a nurse or the person who is cleaning the room, but also the people that are making the products and manufacturing them and figuring out how to get them to market, it's because there's a common commitment to making lives better and improving health. So I think that that's what the shifting change is in healthcare. And from an innovative perspective, we can see that that gap that lies in the middle between a good innovation and how it can make a difference, which means somebody has to pay for it, has a gap. And that gap is now being moved forward in many different ways. Inside of universities, not just here, but all over the world. They're setting up tech transfer offices. They're figuring out how to fund early innovation with seed funds, follow-on funds, angel network, government-sponsored venture capital development in countries like Turkey or Lithuania, but really across the EU. Horizon 2020 is a $60 billion initiative that is funding venture capital. And so having AHA and other venture philanthropy looking at how they can stand inside their mission and forward the development of technologies that are going to impact the very specific area of healthcare they're interested in, but not as a grant provider, which leaves you outside the circle, but rather as an investor, which brings you inside the circle and lets you have a stronger say about meeting milestones or having outcomes focused on what that technology was funded to do, is I think a really important thing, as well as leveraging the brand and the network of expertise that an organization like the American Health Association has.
Mike, what do you all look for in an investment in technology or in healthcare?
Sure. Before I start, let me actually just do a special thanks to the AHA and also the sponsors here. It's particularly exciting to see this event in Chicago, just given everything that's going on at the various universities and institutions here. So it's great, and hopefully we could do that again. Let me also say that if I drop down here because of an AFib event or an MI, I've never felt safer. So, so Annabelle and Rod, I do want you to know I have PPO insurance, so just feel free. There you go. Yeah, I forgot what was the question. Oh yeah. So just very quickly, what I do. So I'm a venture capitalist at Baird Capital, based here in Chicago. We invest in healthcare as well as technology services businesses. The question was really, how do we find these high growth opportunities? And I guess I would answer that really in two ways. Number one is, as I just mentioned, we see so much that's happening here at the local universities and institutions here. We try to partner with the tech transfer groups at Rush, at Northwestern, at University of Illinois, University of Chicago. There's so many things that are happening now, and the key for our job is, hey, how do we bridge this and try to find some of these early stage opportunities, help accelerate them along with some of our expertise and get them moving forward. So we plan on continuing to do that, and I'm very optimistic about some of the things that we're seeing out there. I think the other way I'd answer this question is, and this is something that I think Uday might have mentioned in the first panel, is just, I get this question all the time about, hey, where's healthcare going with healthcare reform and Obamacare? And I guess I'll tell you guys, but this is off the record, I really have no idea, right? I mean, it changes every day, and the impact of it and what's going on. But I do know that some of the themes that was mentioned in the first panel are absolutely right. It's going to be about cost containment. It can't be more costly to the system. There's got to be earlier diagnosis. all these different types of things. And I think the people who know about all this stuff more than anybody else are the providers and the payers that are out there, as well as the strategics who have tons of information on the different products that they have across different industries. So I chat with people like Larry, and we're doing this much more. We're talking to the payers out there who have a ton of information about usage, about what's the right patient populations. And I think one thing we're trying to do is, can we work with these groups earlier on to find new ideas and new technologies to invest in it earlier on, and maybe do those in tandem. Whereas before, I think VCs would do it on their own, we'd build it up and then sell the companies to strategics down the road. I think it's got to be much more in partnership moving forward.
Thank you. Larry, I'd like you to weigh in on a couple things, please. What does BI look for when considering partnering with a smaller company? How about what do you consider when acquiring a company? And what are the gaps in diligence where small companies should pay closer attention when preparing their pitch? And then how about how soon should they begin discussions with BI?
Okay, thanks.
We'll take them.
Okay, yeah, lots of questions. Sure. Maybe I start with echoing some of the comments that have already been made. First, a thank you to the AHA. This is a great forum to share and exchange and learn about healthcare innovation. So we're certainly, as BI, proud to be a part of it. So let me start with, you mentioned a quick intro to BI, and I think that's important for context. So we're, again, the largest privately owned, actually family-owned pharmaceutical company in the world. We operate in about 150 different countries and have been around for over 126 years. So long, successful history in both human and veterinary medicine. But the company believes that patients, especially some with certain chronic diseases, need to be treated more holistically, more comprehensively than with just drug treatment alone. And that's the reason that we're investing in healthcare innovation and new business models. So I provide that context because I think it starts to get to some of the questions. The first one around what do we look for when we're partnering. So we're a big believer in experimentation. So we rather have, let's say, 20 different initiatives running and maybe only 2 of them are quote unquote successful, rather than, let's say, 4 initiatives where 4 are successful. Because we know we'll learn a whole lot just by that experimentation, even if it means failure. So that's first off. Of course, we are interested in much of the due diligence points that a lot of our partners would make as well. The second point that I would make is that we're very interested, and I'll pull a theme from the last panel in this aspect of consumerism. So we agree with that and believe that when we look for different opportunities, we should have a focus on things, on technologies and services that could take care out of a physician's office, move it to a patient's home. Technologies that could once be done had to be done by a physician and now can be done by an allied health professional, or technologies and services that need to be done by a physician but enable the right actionable analytics to be presented right to them, in front of them, so that they can make the best decision for that particular patient. So just a few general principles that we use when we look for and work with new companies. From an acquisition perspective, I'm particularly focused on the non-molecular space. So obviously, Boehringer Ingelheim as a corporation is very interested in licensing and acquiring new molecules. I do everything non-molecular, and at this point, we're really interested in smaller scale collaborations so that, again, we can learn, and perhaps that can inform a future strategic direction. But right now, we're just in a learning and experimentation phase. And then lastly, I'll just comment on how early should people talk to us. I think there's no question that earlier the better, because it might not be the right opportunity for Boehringer to explore at that particular time. But I mean, I think I must save 20 or 30% of my time just talking to people and networking, because that's instrumental to learning what's out there and knowing how that company, advising that company on how they can develop. It goes to a lot of my colleagues' comments earlier, particularly when Jill alluded to us trying to kind of tick the boxes and piece things together. We certainly think that's important and want to be an active part of that.
I'd like Jill and Mike, please, to comment on, if I'm an entrepreneur, an upstart entrepreneur in the Chicago area, what resources are out there for me?
Call Jill.
Thank you. So we are launching our second Chicago program in a couple of weeks, so we'd love to have everyone involved. What I can say is that Chicago is a great place for us to have started for one of the reasons that it has all of the keys that we look for to grow healthcare businesses. There's an active investor network, as Mike was saying before. The universities here are fantastic, producing tons of different technologies every day. Also, just all of the healthcare opportunities between the health systems, the leading payers that are here, with HCSC being a great partner, and also looking into a lot of the associations that are here, from the American Heart Association, the Hospital Association, the AMA. Their reach is national, and that's really important for our entrepreneurs. One little thing that I was actually thinking about this morning is just how, with the maybe challenges that the exchanges are seeing recently, that we also have great developer and system engineer talent in Chicago. With University of Illinois here, and with a lot of the developers looking to stay in state, there's a huge opportunity to enlist them within the healthcare space. And they can really help to grow these companies. As you can tell with the exchanges, once again, if the developers maybe have had a little bit more time, there had been some UX design associated with it, they might not be seeing a lot of the challenges they are today. And especially with, as we've mentioned so many times, the move towards consumerism, some of those designs and applicability is so important to make sure that these technologies are not only used just for a month, but can really be used to change behavior.
Charlie, if I could just add just a couple comments on that. I do think there's a lot of things in place in this ecosystem here now to help entrepreneurs. I do think some of the initiatives that iBio is doing with their Propel program, we've got Chicago Innovation Mentors. I think a lot of those programs are in place to help guide people along, and a lot of people who are very good on the technology building side, but may not have the full understanding of how to build a company and what it takes, and how to avoid venture capitalists and things like that. But I think there's good programs in place. I do think there's incubators set up, and a lot of the universities have those. Either up in Evanston, we've got one right at the IMD, we've got IIT down by the University of Chicago. So there's those facilities as well. And I do think, and some of the people in the audience probably know more about this than I do, but there is recent initiatives that are ongoing right now that's really at the mayor and the governor level in terms of setting up what Andrew, I don't even think they have a name yet. It's still called the Center. It's still called the Center, for the lack of a better name. But it's kind of what we're trying to do here is really kind of have a place where big corporate can meet up with physicians, with entrepreneurs, with different groups, with investors, and kind of have this idea think. And you might call it an incubator, but I don't think that's necessarily the best word for it. But it's kind of an information exchange and some of the things that can happen on the life sciences side that we may already be seeing in Chicago a bit on the technology end. But I think if we're trying to replicate that, it's great to see that we do have, kind of the government and political support on this, and I do think it will happen. But I think as we get on that, it's going to be, impetus upon everyone in the room here, as well as the big companies like Abbott, Baxter, Hospira, Boehringer, to participate in this and to kind of, have everyone all in on this. And I think that's going to further drive a lot of the entrepreneurism that's happening here.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's certainly an appetite from Boehringer Ingelheim and I think probably the pharmaceutical industry more broadly to participate in that and leverage the core capabilities that we've developed over the years to research, develop, and commercialize pharmaceuticals and apply that to newer innovations in the broader healthcare ecosystem. And I think that's shared, and you can see that. I mean, I was just at Johnson & Johnson's Innovation Center in London, and certainly there's even a collaborative effort, which may not be true on the molecule space. It certainly is true on the healthcare innovation and the technology space that we're highly interested in working with even competitive, quote-unquote, pharmaceutical companies to try to make sure that these technologies diffuse with the goal of broader health and a better healthcare ecosystem in the U.S.
Thanks, Larry. We're going to open it up to questions and answers after one more question that I'd like to ask to Gary. So if you would like to ask a question, I'd invite you to come up and stand near a microphone. Gary, how do you evaluate technology and find pathways to commercialization?
Well, first, it varies a little bit on where the technology is going to come from. If it's from a university or a federal laboratory, then your resources are going to be slightly different, or if it's from a corporate pool of technology. But in general, the first thing is always to look at what is it that is already available. So it may be that the technology may have some patent filings. It may have disclosures only. There may be papers that are written. But most important is going to be able to speak to the people that have worked with the technology within the company or whatever entity it is, and the people that they are connected with as a network. So that's one level. Then really to go outside and speak with experts in the field about what these other technologies are that are in that same space, as well as doing due diligence by looking through some resources that are available, like say Thomson's, that will allow you to see other patents that are in the same space, doing searching to find other researchers or companies with competitive products. And then also the most valuable thing I would say in the work that I've done to be able to commercialize technologies is having a network of people and knowing who they are, where their expertise lies, what they know, where they've been, and what they're interested in. So for example, in Florida, I was the founding executive director for the Florida Institute for the Commercialization of Public Research. And there what we did was create a very large pool of seasoned entrepreneurs that had done it successfully before, of early stage investors, and all the commercializable technologies from all of the public and private, as well as federal research institutions in the state, and to begin evaluating them, first of all, by letting them do that first level of what they thought was worthwhile, and then figuring out both what was there and how to present it and who should it be partnered with. Because ultimately it's about where the value is, and sometimes that value is well served as a startup, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you may find that it doesn't have value, and there may be other things to focus on. And sometimes you may find that a strategic partner that already has products in that space or has the ability and infrastructure to build that product may do it better. So that process of being able to evaluate always starts with where could you create the most value and impact out of the technology after you've done the analysis.
Thanks, Gary. As I mentioned, I would invite anyone who has a question to come forward now. Please give your name, your company's name, clearly into the microphone.
Jeff Goldberger, electrophysiologist at Northwestern. This has been a fascinating, both panels discussing the various, I guess, infrastructures that exist for development in atrial fibrillation. As you listen to some of the issues, costs, and resources, and you look at this from a global perspective across the variety of stakeholders, you'd almost describe that historically our research and development infrastructure for atrial fibrillation has an entropic quality to it. And in a time of ample resources and costs, that actually may be very beneficial. As those become constrained, the question I would have for the panel is, does it become more beneficial to actually develop a broad, more focused R&D infrastructure for atrial fibrillation that would include a broad array of stakeholders? And then even more importantly than that question, is that even really feasible?
Panelists?
I would say that the scientific infrastructure would be the focus of AHA's 135, 150 million a year grants for basic science. Mm-hmm. I think that our focus is in investing is to get the game changers to market more quickly. I should also mention that the difference between us and venture capital, I like to call us venture catalysts, is to identify the game changers and then help to loop in others to get others interested in investing, not just with us collaboratively, but also in terms of our getting them across the valley of death and then handing off, finding those we hand off to. And the one thing that organizations like AHA, leukemia, lymphoma, juvenile diabetes, myeloma research, who have accelerator programs can offer is incredible breadth and depth of expertise focused in that specific area to help identify those innovations which could have the greatest impact and potentially the greatest commercial benefits and get them to market quickly. But we need our venture capital colleagues to help us with that.
To answer your question, I'd say that there's a great value in having some focus and a technocentric approach to the commercialization of technology. And so, for example, as it relates to AHA, being able to focus on cardiology. And I've been able to see this personally at some level because there's an Institute for Cardiac Innovation in Louisville. My brother is one of the directors. So we speak about this quite a bit. And I listen to the kind of synergy that happens because people with that particular interest and focus migrate to that particular center of innovation because it's what they're interested in, rather than having it be very broad-based. So it creates a pretty strong network. But what I also heard as you spoke is that there's also a benefit because we know that there is relationships between, say, obesity, diabetes, and cardiology, that those other centers may have people and innovations that have direct correlation for outcomes that can improve the things that the American Heart Association is interested in. And so but you can't always develop a technology for all of its different potential benefits. So being able to also be able to, say, develop a second application or evaluate a second application for something that's happening in one of these other centers is another synergy that may be available.
And also AHA's science program is now going to be focusing on bringing together researchers from multiple institutions to catalyze coordination and collaboration.
Other questions? Please.
Thank you. I'm Ted Winslow, cardiologist on faculty at Northwestern and medical historian of sorts. Both Ms. Seidman and Dr. Liang talked about Chicago being a place where you could have a center for bringing things together. Chicago has more medical schools than any other city in the country. They don't get together. And I'm going to take a page out of Annabelle's book and try and get the Heart Association to redo something that we tried to do in the 60s and 70s called the Interinstitutional Cardiovascular Center, where the Heart Association tried to be a place that brought together all the researchers involved in cardiovascular disease to talk to each other. We have individual areas, and we have, in EP, for example, every of the medical schools in the city has a very good, not okay, but very good EP department, and they almost never talk to each other. And so I think trying to get the Heart Association to bring all the people, the players together to talk to each other would be a wonderful thing to do with our funds and resources. And it would then allow those people to go to Ms. Seidman or Dr. Liang or Mr. Brooks to talk about, we've got something now, can we fund it, or venture capital?
Well, first of all, I had to laugh when you said Dr. Liang, and no one calls me that except my mother, so I'm honored for you to say that. I wholeheartedly agree, and one of the reasons I said this whole comment about Chicago is because we are talking about AFib today. We have some of the world's leading research and the centers that are going on here, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be doing these things. And I guess I would just say, whatever the AHA can do to kind of help spur this on, and I think Chicago's as great a place as any to do that, I mean, I would be all in favor.
And I guess I would just like to add and maybe challenge Dr. Winslow even a little bit more is that it's not just bringing the academic medical centers together, it's all of the medical centers, it's all of the clinics in the city. I think that what we believe at HealthBox is that innovation can come from anywhere, and it's important to support it across the city and beyond.
Dr. Albert?
That's exactly what I wanted to say. I have 40 patents now. And when I was a third-year medical student at Duke a long time ago, I got a $5,000 March of Dimes fellowship that started me on innovation. I would ask the people on this panel, we have these amazing medical schools here, and by the way, I'll bring up my friend Dave Wilbur, who hasn't been mentioned, but everyone here knows him. We have phenomenal electrophysiology. I'm adopting Chicago, thank you. We have phenomenal technology, Dr. Arsbecker, the Illinois Institute of Technology. You have a critical mass. Fund students. Students are a source. They don't know what is impossible. Therefore, they go do it. Please fund students. Some of them will become entrepreneurs, whether they're engineering students, medical students. But $5,000 isn't much to start a company. But it's a tremendous amount to a medical student or an engineering graduate student. And those people who are thumb facile and smartphone enabled and cloud smart will help drive innovations.
I'll just make a quick comment on that because I think that's terrific. BI had hosted an innovation competition earlier this year where we asked for innovative companies, non-molecular, but healthcare IT, to come together and share with us how they think they can solve the diabetes epidemic. And the winner, which we publicly announced, was a company called Adhere Tech, and we gave them a prize of $50,000 to launch their business. And I think those are the types of things that we as a company will continue to support in various local areas. That was a global competition based out of New York and New Delhi, India. But those are the type of things I think would be great to bring to areas like Chicago and the whole country.
Thanks, Larry. Gary?
I was just going to say that I think that what you pointed to just now is really important. And you could say it's an entrepreneurship internship. But if you look at different accelerator programs, and I've spent about 1.5 years and wrote a guide on commercialization of intellectual property for WIPO. And it gave me a chance to really look at different models for accelerating technologies all over the world. And the ones that are really emerging that seem to be most successful are programs where entrepreneurs are engaged in a program over a period of months with specific milestones and kept focused and brought with resources and people that can help guide them. And you know, those kind of programs are now starting to show up here in Chicago, which is really exciting. We had a conference recently called the Midwest University Research Network, which is an organization that began about a decade ago, and there's a conference each year looking at commercializing technologies. Well, we truncated the reception this year to go to Next Space, which is on the 14th floor of the Wrigley Building, which is going to be that type of space and to do those type of programs. And it's also kind of what you're seeing at 1871, which is a lot of people being brought together and guided in a very significant way. So I think that being able to do those kind of things and having them be technocentric from AHA's particular perspective may be a useful way to guide that money in a way that supports not just identifying the technologies, but also identifying the people that are going to be excited and committed and be willing to work 80 hours a week to do what's needed to get early stage technologies to the next level. And I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Charlie, can I just add on two comments to this? I think, thank you for bringing this up. I do think it's interesting. There's different ways that people like Jill and I can do this outside of investing in an actual company. I do think, I'll give you an example. I'm very proud of being on the Rush Associates Board at Rush Medical Center. And one of the things that we've started doing is you know, it's a bunch of community leaders that are trying together to raise capital for Rush for its various initiatives. But also what we've started doing is giving research grants to people, and I'm proud to say Annabelle was one of the last recipients of that. We're trying to work more closely with groups like what Matt is doing in his tech transfer group to try to give small grants. And they might not be much, but they may be something to do another animal study or do some type of work that'll fuel things on and maybe bridge this, you know, this valley of death that Ross is talking about. I do think the other way, and I'm sure Jill does this as much as I do, is just maybe we don't give capital to a company, but we do sit down with founders and professors as much as we can and give them thoughts about the science, give them guidance in terms of, hey, you should think about doing this, or help guide them in terms of, it may not be a fit for what I'm trying to do, but here's other avenues of capital that you can go down. So to all the entrepreneurs and academic faculty in the room, I guess I would encourage you to reach out to us anytime, and even if it's not a fit for what we're trying to do in our day jobs, we're more than happy to help in other ways.
I obviously second what Mike is saying. I would also add that, and this is anecdotal, I believe 4 of our 48 portfolio companies were started by, at the time, students. But what I think is also really important is to bring them out of that academic setting and into the real world setting, and that's the value that Mike and I in our respective organizations can provide. A lot of times these academic settings are amazing and supportive. They're also a bit insular in what it does take to grow a company. And the real world often isn't like some of the higher Ivy League education of the students that we're dealing with. So teaching them, they have the passion, they have the intelligence, but really teaching them how to be entrepreneurs and how to grow that company is something that's a little bit difficult, but that we can help them with as well.
And I think the comment by Dave about providing grants to medical students is very important because of one thing he said. They don't always know what's impossible. I always think of Steve Wozniak designing a new disk drive for the Apple II back in the late 70s. And it turned out to be an incredibly more efficient method than what was on the market at the time because he didn't know that what he did was impossible. Also, I think that prizes are incredibly effective for drawing in expertise way outside the box and applying it to a problem. Example is I'm thinking of a coating method for fireproofing steel girders that was developed after 9/11. And turned out someone realized that, this could be applicable to stents. Indeed, a company was created because of that. So prizes can be extremely useful for bringing innovations and ideas together from people who are not even involved in the practice of medicine or medical research.
We have another question. Before we get to this question, I just want to relay the importance of the accelerator program that American Heart Association has started. I had the pleasure of hearing U.S. Congressman Chaka Fattah in Philadelphia a little over a year ago, and he was a part of a panel. Dr. Tompkins was in the audience, and at the time, we listened for about an hour to people just take shots at, listen, government funding is dried up, and if you know anything about Chaka Fattah, he controlled the purse strings of the House Ways and Means Committee at that time. So he was a very influential person in terms of who gets what funding. Again, Dr. Tompkins was not a panelist at the time. He pointed at Dr. Tompkins in the audience and he said, in this room of dimly lit funding sources, Dr. Tompkins and his organization with this accelerator is the candle. So I just thought, for that person placed where he's placed in Congress to say that, that tells me we've got our ladder on the right wall. Your question, please.
Hi, I'm Dr. Josephine Pollock, and I'm the founder and CEO of a startup here, a biotech startup. And what I wanted to touch on, and we are actually a Propelled company as well as a SIM, or Chicago Innovative Mentors. I want to touch upon something that you said, and it's not only the funding. I mean, the thing that I come out of the engineering world and then, medical, changed a lot and did a lot of different things. It's not only money, it's the contacts. As we've talked about bridging that gap, the thing that I struggle with in Chicago, when I meet people in Boston, I meet people in California, they've got that network of where you can talk to people to understand we need to know whether our technology's got a market out there and whether we're making mistakes. But also when you want to understand, I want to talk to somebody at J&J, where can we find that? It's really hard around here. So I'd like you to comment on that.
And let me ask you a question then. So you are based in Chicago and you felt it a struggle.
Yeah.
What's the reason for staying here in Chicago as opposed to moving to somewhere else?
Oh my
I hope you answer that the right way, but I'm just curious. Yeah.
The people here are wonderful, and it's a very good place. Yeah. It's the weather. Yeah. The weather, sorry, I lived in DC for a while. I'm going to have a hard time there.
Sure. I would say that, we have seen there are challenges in Chicago that we don't see in Boston and San Francisco. It is a lot easier in those cities to bring the people together in a room. There's already an ecosystem that's further ahead. In Chicago, it's growing and it's building. I think for us at HealthVox, it's a great reason why we're here, in order to bring those companies together with the industry. I think we're also actually seeing a trend towards later stage companies needing that extra help and that advice and that access to a network that unfortunately they're not able to access on their own. And that's from a combination of just trying to get more people in a room together. What I do believe about Chicago is that we have all the elements of the ecosystem here, so it's coming to all the events that are already there and encouraging all of it to come together. An event like today is a perfect example. I believe this is Digital Health Week. There's an XX in Health event also today for women in healthcare entrepreneurship. Tomorrow there's a Health 2.0 event. It's continuing to go to those and then expanding beyond just our typical circles. It's really getting and ingraining in the nurses that are on the floor, the COOs of a hospital that are going to be the ones that buy the technology and have to implement it. I think that's where we struggle, but I also think that we have all the elements together that we can continue to build on.
So I would like to address this from the perspective of being someone who's been in the community for a long time and listening to a conversation for a long time about that we have all the elements, and looking at, for a long time, a lot of events and networking meetings and conversations about why don't we have it, what somebody else has, whether it's on the East Coast, the West Coast, or other places in the world. Well, ultimately, what I figured out at some point in time was that one is it has to be really supported by the governor. And then I realized that the governors that really support a technology initiative that could produce results are going to be in their second term because they're interested in a legacy, and it's not going to happen in 4 years. But ultimately, it's about the community coming together and saying, we don't want to talk about it anymore. What we want to do is figure out what we can actually put our time, our money, and our effort to and create results around. So I think that the thing that we could get pumped up about is that now's a great time to do exactly that. And I think AHA's focus on how to accelerate that through both your prestige and your funding is an extraordinary thing.
Thanks, Gary. Michael, you have a comment, I see. We're going to need to wrap up in about 1 minute, so appreciate everybody's questions. Go, please.
I always have a comment. Thank you for that. I think what Gary's saying is it takes time, right? I am optimistic that what we are seeing now, it's first coming out on the healthcare IT, healthcare services side. I think the success of the tech industry in Chicago, it's kind of merging over, and then a lot of these healthcare IT platforms, you're starting to see an ecosystem building there. I think biotech and medtech will take more time, but all I can say is kind of what's been said before. The more that AHA can do here, the more that BI can be around, the big pharma companies. I was doing the same thing at a panel for about a few weeks ago. It was sponsored by Merck and Merck's Global Health Initiative and what's going on. Not to give a plug to Merck here, but just what they're trying to do outside of pharma, right? And they were spending time in Chicago. They thought there was a lot of interesting things that were here. It's just all these things add up, and that was why I made the comment I did in the beginning in terms of it's so fantastic to have AHA, hosting an event in Chicago. The more and more we do this, I just think it's going to be additive. So sorry, that doesn't totally answer your question, but I just think it's all these little things that'll hopefully add up.
Sir, do you have a quick comment?
Sure. Hi, Dave Beiser from University of Chicago. I'm an emergency physician and a budding entrepreneur. And I just wanted to, it's more of a comment. I think that there's certainly the funding chasm that all entrepreneurs need to cross, but there's also kind of this chasm of kind of needing, you're breaking out of like a larger organization. So the folks that really have the insight into the problems are typically either the academics or those on the front lines of healthcare. And they're working, for the most part, in large organizations. Entrepreneurship is kind of a deviant behavior in a way, right? And so to the extent that we can normalize this deviant behavior, I think that's a good thing. And so groups, cross academy kind of groups like SIM that are industry plus university plus advocacy groups, when those groups get together, that helps to normalize that. AHA's kind of accelerator program, that normalizes that. So when I'm, as an academic, working on something that's right now not academic, and that doesn't have value to the organization, to the University of Chicago. But if AHA is funding it, suddenly, they get interested. And so it's more of a comment that, to the extent that AHA gets involved in innovation, groups like SIM, HealthBox and other accelerators, as they bring in kind of folks from large organizations, I think that's where we're really going to get some great ideas, and folks with deep domain knowledge is what we need, because we've got the entrepreneurs here. They aren't necessarily the ones with the domain knowledge. So.
I should add that we also invest more than capital. We provide guidance and even mentorship. We've written protocols. We've provided advice on regulatory strategies and so forth. So it's more than just the capital we're providing.
Please join me in thanking our panelists.